Sometimes, justice doesn't come from skill, or science, or even persistence. Sometimes, it's pure luck. Fate can be cruel. It can take a life in an instant, or save one by chance. And in the world of crime and investigation, luck can change everything. Over the next 2 hours, you'll witness 5 true stories where fate, accident, or coincidence cracked cases no detective ever could. Each one darker than the last. Our first story begins on a freezing November evening, in the suburbs of Leeds, England. A quiet street. Christmas lights just starting to appear in windows. And a 16-year-old girl, who never made it home. Leanne Tiernan was the kind of girl everyone liked, small, bright-eyed, and always laughing with friends. On November 26, 2000, she left her friend's house after shopping for Christmas gifts. She had less than a mile to walk. She never arrived. For weeks, her disappearance consumed the city of Leeds. Posters lined the streets. Helicopters scoured the nearby woods. Her family begged on TV for her return. But nothing. No clues. No witnesses. Just silence. Then, 9 months later, a man walking his dog in a remote wooded area near Brimham Rock stumbled upon something odd. A black plastic bag buried under a layer of leaves. Inside was Leanne. Her body carefully wrapped in sheets, her clothing neatly folded beside her, preserved in a chilling way that hinted her killer had kept her for months before disposal. The investigation reignited. Forensic experts combed through fibers, hair, and debris. Police had some DNA traces, but no matches. The case went cold again. Until, a year later, police responded to an unrelated incident, a dog theft. A man named John Taylor, a 46-year-old parcel delivery driver, was under suspicion for stealing a neighbor's dog. A small crime, hardly worth attention. Officers visited his home, a cluttered, gloomy house filled with old boxes and tools. During a routine search, one detective noticed a piece of rope lying in the corner. It was a particular kind, red and black nylon twine. He bagged it, just as standard procedure. Days later, a forensic analyst compared it with the rope used to bind Leanne Tiernan. The fibers were identical. Not just the same type, the same manufacturing batch. That's when the coincidences began to pile up. Investigators, curious now, decided to fingerprint Taylor, again, routine after any arrest. And that fingerprint matched one partial print found on the plastic bag that had held Leanne's body. A print investigators once thought was too incomplete to ever identify. Pure luck had resurrected it. When police dug deeper, they found Taylor had once worked for a local delivery company. His routes included Leanne's neighborhood. They searched his property. In his freezer they found cable ties, plastic bags, and the same sheets Leanne was wrapped in. His dark secret had been hiding in plain sight. John Taylor was convicted of Leanne Tiernan's murder in 2002. The prosecution admitted, if it weren't for the dog theft investigation, this case might still be unsolved today. Sometimes, justice knocks when no one expects it. Sometimes, a leash in a thief's hand leads to a killer. That was luck, pure, chilling luck. But what if the killer himself handed the evidence over? What if he revealed his secret with his own hands? Before we go deeper into that next story, if true horror and real justice fascinate you, subscribe and stay close. Because what comes next is a story of arrogance, pride, and one digital mistake that exposed a monster hiding in plain sight. Some killers vanish into legend, ghosts who walk among the living. For decades, one such ghost haunted Wichita, Kansas. He called himself BTK. Bind. Torture. Kill. He wanted the world to know his name, but not his face. For nearly 30 years, he was the perfect predator. He watched, he waited, he killed, and then disappeared like smoke. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No mistakes. Until one day, he made the simplest, stupidest mistake imaginable. A computer disk. A single piece of technology that would destroy him. Wichita, 1974. A quiet suburb. January snow. Wichita clings to the windows of a family home on Edgemore Street. Inside, the Otero family is starting their morning. A father, a mother, 2 children. Moments later, their lives are gone. When police arrive, they're faced with a nightmare. The parents strangled. The children, murdered with a precision and patience that felt methodical. It was clear, whoever did this, took their time. A few months later, another woman was found dead, bound, gagged, and killed in the same chilling style. Then another. And another. The killer began sending letters to local news stations, bragging, describing details only the murderer could know. He demanded a name for himself. And in one letter he signed it. "I am BTK." Years passed. The letter stopped. But the city never healed. Parents locked their doors twice. Women changed their routines. Detectives grew old chasing a phantom. By the 1990s, BTK was a cold case. No new leads. Just a myth. Then, in 2004, 25 years after his last confirmed murder, he came back. A local TV station in Wichita receives an envelope. Inside, a photocopy of a missing woman's driver's license. And a note. "Can I communicate with you and be safe?" The police freeze. The handwriting, identical to BTK's old letters. The spacing. The tone. It's him. But now, the game is different. DNA technology has evolved. Computers can trace, analyze, and store what 1970s detectives never could. BTK, however, doesn't realize how much the world has changed. He's still playing a game of cat and mouse, but he's decades out of date. March 2005. Police receive another message from BTK. He's taunting them again, but this time, he asks a question that would seal his fate. He writes, "Can a floppy disk be traced?" Be honest. The detectives can hardly believe what they're reading. A serial killer is asking them for digital advice. They reply publicly through a newspaper ad, pretending to play along. They write back, "No. It can't be traced." And BTK believes them. Weeks later, a purple floppy disk arrives at a local TV station. The file name reads, Christ Lutheran Church. Inside, a Word document. Investigators open it carefully. They scan the metadata. And there, hidden in the digital signature, was a name. Dennis. And under the Organization tab, Christ Lutheran Church. The church website lists its president, Dennis Rader. A city compliance officer. A husband. A father of 2. And a respected member of his community. When detectives search his address, they're stunned. The quiet, middle-aged man mowing his lawn was BTK. The monster who bragged about his crimes for decades was their neighbor. Police obtain a warrant and secretly test DNA from a pap smear belonging to Rader's daughter, taken years earlier during a medical procedure. The results come back within days. A perfect match to the BTK crime scenes. That floppy disk, that one single disk, had handed police everything. When Rader was finally arrested, he didn't fight. He smiled. In the interrogation room, he spoke calmly, almost proudly. He detailed every murder, each victim, each night he stalked them. He confessed not because of guilt, but because he loved talking about himself. It was as if he wanted his story told, even if it ended in a cell. "You know, I pretty much knew it was over when I asked about that disc. But I had to keep playing." Narrator's voice returns, cold and reflective. The man who once outsmarted dozens of detectives was undone by his own arrogance. By a question he didn't need to ask. By a lie he chose to believe. He pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. The judge asked why he did it. Rader simply said, "Because it became a project." Sometimes justice is brilliant. Sometimes it's brutal. And sometimes, it's just luck wrapped in stupidity. If Rader hadn't sent that disc, if he hadn't trusted that one false answer, the BTK case might still be open today. He might still be living quietly in Wichita, the perfect ghost. But fate, in its own twisted way, gave the world closure. A monster caught, not by science, not by strategy, but by his own question. A single word in a metadata file ended 30 years of fear. And in that silence that followed, Wichita could finally breathe. But not every case ends so neatly. Sometimes, luck takes another shape, something hidden, forgotten, or lost, until time itself reveals the truth. Our next story begins with a vial of DNA, misplaced for decades. A case that haunted California for 40 years, until, by random chance, a distant relative unknowingly unlocked the past. Heartbeats fade into static. Then a whisper. The Golden State Killer. Some cases don't die. They just sleep, waiting for time, or luck, to wake them. And in California, for decades, one of the darkest monsters in American history slept hidden in plain sight. A man who crept through windows, whispered to his victims, and vanished before sunrise. He was called many names: the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker. But history remembers him by one: the Golden State Killer. From the mid-1970s through the mid-1980s, terror spread across California's suburbs. He attacked couples, bound men, assaulted women, always with precision, patience, and rage. By the time he stopped, more than a dozen people were dead, 50 women violated, and not a single trace of his identity. Police had DNA, but no matches. In the age before digital databases, it was useless. Years passed. Detectives retired. Files gathered dust. Until one tiny sample, long forgotten in a freezer, found its way back into the light. And fate did the rest. Sacramento County, 1976. A quiet neighborhood sleeps. A dog barks in the distance. A woman hears a sound in her kitchen, footsteps, careful and slow. When she reaches for the phone, a beam of light blinds her. A man in a ski mask. A gun. A whisper. Don't move. The pattern repeats, night after night, town after town. Police form task forces. Nothing works. He seems to anticipate every move, cutting phone lines, escaping through canals, melting into darkness. The media calls him the East Area Rapist. Years later, when the killings begin in Southern California, detectives realize he's evolved, now murdering to erase witnesses. By the late 80s, the trail goes cold. He disappears. And so does hope. 1997. A Sacramento criminalist opens an old evidence locker. Inside, tiny envelopes, each labeled with a victim's name. In one, sealed in a glass vial, lies a degraded DNA sample collected years earlier from a 1978 crime scene. Technology has advanced just enough to test it again. The analyst runs it through CODIS, the National DNA Database. No matches. It's uploaded. Forgotten. Stored for another decade. Then, in 2018, a new kind of database emerges, not police-controlled, but public. G-Match. An online platform where ordinary people upload their genetic data to find relatives, build family trees, or trace ancestry. A retired investigator named Paul Holes has an idea. What if they upload the Golden State Killer's DNA there? What if someone, somewhere, shares a fragment of that code? He convinces a small team to try. They take the old DNA from the forgotten vial, upload it, and wait. Days later, a match. Not the killer himself, but a distant cousin. Imagine hundreds of branches on a family tree, each leaf a potential suspect. The genealogist, Barbara Ray Venter, begins reconstructing generations, birth records, marriages, obituaries. Piece by piece, she narrows the pool from thousands, to hundreds, to a handful. And then, one name fits everything. A man in his 70s, living quietly in Citrus Heights. A former police officer. Joseph James D'Angelo. The irony is sharp enough to draw blood. A man sworn to uphold the law, had spent decades hiding behind it. April 2018. Surveillance teams follow D'Angelo for days. He shops for groceries, chats with neighbors, fixes his boat. He's just an old man, polite, forgettable. until he throws a tissue into a trash can. Agents move fast, collect it, and test it. The DNA matches the old sample perfectly. That long-lost vial from 1978 finally speaks. Luck, pure luck, and a curious genealogist had cracked a case that haunted America for 40 years. When police confront D'Angelo, he mutters only, "I did all those things." No fight. No denial. Just a man trapped by the past he thought was buried. For decades, he watched families cry on the news. He saw his own crimes turned into cold case documentaries. And he smiled, certain he'd beaten time itself. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes it hides in a freezer. Sometimes it sleeps in forgotten code. And sometimes, fate hands it to someone curious enough to look. D'Angelo was sentenced to life without parole in 2020. He sat silent as survivors spoke, women who'd been young when he ruined their lives, now old enough to see him pay. One woman stood before him and whispered, "You didn't win." That old DNA, that fragile, lost sample, had carried her voice through time. But our next case isn't about science at all. It's about a wallet. A single missing wallet that traveled through strangers' hands until it ended up with the one person who could solve a murder. Because sometimes, fate doesn't need technology. Just timing. Sometimes, justice takes years. Sometimes, decades. And sometimes, it comes from the unlikeliest place, a stranger who refuses to let a name fade away. This is the story of Angie Dodge. A 19-year-old girl, full of life, laughter, and ambition, whose death became one of Idaho's most haunting mysteries. And whose killer was caught by pure chance. Idaho Falls, 1996. A small town where everyone knows everyone. Where doors are left unlocked, and neighbors wave across lawns. Angie Dodge had just moved into her first apartment on I Street. It was her chance at independence, her first real home. She spent the evening folding laundry, writing in her journal, and chatting with friends about the weekend ahead. The next morning, her coworkers grew worried when she didn't show up for work. A friend went to check on her apartment. What they found would haunt the town for decades. Angie was found dead on her bedroom floor. The scene was brutal, personal, filled with rage. There were signs of struggle, and evidence that the killer had tried to clean up. DNA was collected, a sample from an unknown male. Police were certain this would be solved quickly. They had science on their side. But they were wrong. Months passed. The case went cold, until a young man named Christopher Tapp came under suspicion. He'd been seen with some of Angie's friends, and after hours of interrogation, his story began to change. Detectives pressured him. They said his friends had talked. They hinted at deals, leniency, understanding. And eventually, exhausted and scared, he confessed. He said he'd been there, though his version kept changing. The problem? The DNA didn't match him. Not even close. Still, prosecutors went ahead. They called him a participant, convicted him of murder, and sentenced him to life in prison. For years, Christopher Tapp sat behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. While the real killer lived free, his DNA waiting, quietly, for fate to intervene. Enter Cece Moore, a genetic genealogist known for solving the impossible. She'd watched Angie's case for years, and something about it wouldn't leave her mind. That innocent man. That unsolved DNA. That unfinished story. In 2019, Moore and her team gained permission to upload the unknown DNA from Angie's crime scene to a genealogy database. They didn't expect much, but then, the screen flickered with a name. Not a direct match. Just a distant relative. Still, it was enough. Using birth records, family trees, and countless archives, they built a web that stretched across states, one name leading to another, generation by generation. Until it narrowed to a single family. And one man. That man was Brian Dripps. He'd once lived across the street from Angie's apartment. He'd even known her, just barely. But he'd never been considered a suspect. Police began surveillance quietly. One evening, Dripps was seen dropping something, a cigarette butt, outside his truck window. Detectives collected it, bagged it, and sent it for testing. But what's eerie is what started that surveillance in the first place: a wallet, lost and found years earlier. It had belonged to a man whose distant DNA connection matched the same family tree C.C. Moore was investigating. That man had no idea who Angie Dodge was. But his wallet, with his genetic trace inside, was the clue that pushed Moore to double back through the family line and discover Drips. Without that lost wallet, the tree might never have been completed. A random, forgotten object, traveling from stranger to stranger, had guided them home. When confronted, Brian Drips broke down almost instantly. He confessed to killing Angie Dodge alone, claiming it was never meant to happen, that it got out of control. He said he'd been drinking, and that he didn't know why he did it. 23 years of silence ended with a single mistake, and a chain of luck no one could have planned. Christopher Tapp was released and officially exonerated. He walked out of prison free, after losing half his life. And Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, who had never stopped fighting for the truth, finally stood before her daughter's real killer. It took a lost wallet, a curious genealogist, and a mother's unbreakable heart to turn luck into justice. Sometimes, fate leaves clues scattered in the unlikeliest of places. And sometimes those clues find the right hands, when the world least expects it. But what happens when luck isn't just timing, but coincidence in motion? When officers, just doing their routine patrol, stumble upon something that changes everything? Our final story is about that kind of luck, the kind that stops a killer in his tracks. Next, The Random Patrol, the death of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, UK. It was a warm August evening in 2002. The kind of evening England rarely gets: clear skies, calm air, and a soft, golden light falling across the small town of Soham, Cambridgeshire. Two best friends, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, both 10 years old, had just finished a family barbecue. They were inseparable, bright, smiling, dressed in matching Manchester United shirts. At 6:15 p.m., they left the house to buy some candy at the corner shop. They never came back. When Holly and Jessica didn't return, their parents called friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen them. By nightfall, the entire town was out searching, flashlights cutting through hedges and fields. Police joined in by midnight. Posters went up the next morning. Two faces, side by side, smiling, now symbols of fear and heartbreak. For 2 long weeks, the world watched in horror. News channels replayed the footage of their last known sighting, captured on CCTV, walking together past a local school. And that school would become the center of everything. The caretaker of the Soham Village College, Ian Huntley, was helpful, almost too helpful. He gave interviews to reporters, spoke with concern about the missing girls, even described how he'd last seen them. He said they'd stopped by his home briefly, asked about his girlfriend, the teaching assistant Maxine Carr, then left. He looked calm, polite, cooperative. But beneath that mask was something darker. Something the police might never have found, if not for luck. 2 weeks after the girls vanished, officers were assigned to patrol a rural area near the small village of Lakenheath, about 30 miles from Soham. It wasn't an area connected to the investigation, just routine surveillance. But one of the officers noticed something odd, a foul smell drifting through the air, coming from a ditch near an old airbase road. At first, they thought it was a dead animal. But when they got closer, they saw something wrapped in a blanket. 2 small shapes. 2 sets of matching clothes. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman had been found. Their bodies were carefully hidden, placed together, as if in twisted imitation of the friendship they shared. Investigators knew immediately that whoever did this had taken time, and likely knew the area well. The site was processed for evidence. Fibers, hair, and soil samples were collected. But the most crucial clue came not from science, but from memory. One officer, recalling his time guarding the school during the early days of the search, remembered that Ian Huntley had changed his car tires shortly after the girls went missing. He'd found it strange, Why change tires during an investigation? Police decided to quietly check his vehicle records. They traced his old tires to a local garage. Tests revealed they matched the tread patterns found in the dirt near the ditch where the girls were discovered. It wasn't forensic brilliance, it was luck. A random patrol led to a discovery, which sparked a memory, which connected the dots. From there, the entire facade crumbled. When questioned again, Huntley's story began to shift. He claimed one girl had fallen into the bath, and he'd panicked. But the evidence, fibers from his home, burns from an attempted cleanup, and witness contradictions, told a different story. On August 17, 2002, Ian Huntley was arrested and charged with the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Maxine Carr was charged with perverting the course of justice. She'd provided him with a false alibi, pretending she'd been with him that night. During the trial, the nation wept. Parents across Britain kept their children close, terrified by the thought of monsters who could blend so easily into ordinary life. Huntley received 2 life sentences. Carr served 3 years in prison. In Soham, the school's gates became a memorial, covered in flowers, toys, and photos. 2 little girls who should have grown up, graduated, lived, had instead become symbols of innocence stolen. But if not for that random patrol, if not for 2 officers simply doing their routine drive through the countryside, the truth might have stayed buried forever. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive through grand breakthroughs or genius detectives. Sometimes it's just a pair of headlights cutting through the dark, and a moment of human instinct that refuses to look away. 5 cases. 5 moments where luck, not logic, broke the silence. A fingerprint on a bag. A floppy disk forgotten. A DNA sample revived. A lost wallet. And a patrol that turned right instead of left. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides behind tragedy. And sometimes it waits for fate to intervene. Pause. Ambient hum fades. Then, a low heartbeat sound begins. If you've stayed with us this long, you know, these stories aren't just about death. They're about truth. About how even in darkness, chance can shine a light. So if you want to keep exploring the strange edge between crime, mystery, and fate, make sure you're subscribed. Because on this channel, every story has a shadow. And sometimes, it's luck that decides which one steps into the light.